Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Kamran Kiani, and I'd like to welcome you to this weekly webinar series that we've been holding. And the topic for today's webinar is the calm after the storm. And this is a twist on the proverb, the calm before the storm, which sounds menacing. However, what I'm trying to do is relate or create an analogy between what's going on these days and a typical storm, and recognize that this will eventually be. And when it's over, we want to be ready to take benefit of the calm that comes after that. Today, I will be talking to you about a few different things. I will first talk about what it means to project the present into the future. So we'll have a brief conversation about that. We will obviously talk about the reality of the ongoing COVID epidemic, and then the crisis, the economic crisis that has led us to, and the sort of problems that it is creating for us, and how we might be able to project the present into the future from an economic point of view. We will also talk about our own role as individuals. Now, I'm assuming that most of the people who are joining us are working in a job somewhere or hope to work in a job somewhere, and I will be focusing on our role as professionals. We could have a slightly different conversation if you are an entrepreneur, and I might touch on that, although my focus will be on those people who are working in an organization or eventually want to be associated with an organization when this thing is over. The calm after the storm. With every difficulty comes ease. This is something that we are familiar with. But what is important is for us to have a lot of clarity about what is going on today. A couple of weeks ago, I think 3 weeks ago, I ran a webinar entitled Beyond the Coronavirus. And in that webinar, which is available on the same channel if you wanted to take a look at it, I talked about what the future might look like in general terms. So we talked about the society, we talked about business, we talked about technology. So we talked about these things in general terms. But over these past 3 weeks, we've had a lot of information available. And now we're able to construct a much clearer picture of what's going on today. And because we know a lot about what's going on today, we're able to create a picture of the impending future. My hope is that as a result of this discussion, you'll be able to take something concrete away. You will be able to implement something in your own personal or professional life and be able to benefit from it. And that is what I'm hoping to do today. So we'll do this in the form of a couple of activities. I will ask you a few questions. I will ask you to introspect. I will ask you to think about what's going on in your own situation. And your situation may be very different from the situation of somebody else who's also attending this webinar with you. What I want you to do as you go through this process is develop the ability to project the present into the future for yourself, because your own situation is unique to you. I will talk about this in relatively more general terms, and I will share some tools and techniques with you, but it will be eventually your responsibility to take these tools and techniques and apply them to your own situation. Let me start with a note of caution for us. Let me share with you the results of the people applying for unemployment benefits in the US. Some of you might have seen these statistics. So challenges are obvious now. You will notice here that the number of claims filed even after the crisis in 2008, 2009 were not that high, but suddenly over the past 3 weeks, a very large number of claims have been filed. It was 3.3 million, I believe, or 3.2 million the first week, then about 6.6 million the second week, and another 6 odd million the third week. So we're talking about 16 million claims. These are 16 million people who have been laid off. And if you were to just think about the storm aspect of it, yeah, that sounds very, very difficult, because this is the largest economy of the world. They're almost the consumers of the world. If you look at the size of the US economy, I think it's like 20 odd trillion. They are the customers of the world. The rest of the world produces, and the rest of the world lends them money, and then that's how the rest of the world is able to create jobs and produce for this economy. And when this economy is going to slow down, the adage is, when the US economy gets a cold, the rest of the world gets pneumonia. Unfortunately, more apt today in this COVID epidemic than it was earlier. But that is what we're looking at. So we're sort of seeing a pick off, which is 16 million over the past 3 weeks and possibly more during the laid off. It's important to pay attention to that as well, because that represents a potential opportunity. That is the number of people who are working in jobs that do not necessarily require being there in person, which means that's a job that could be done from anywhere, which means opportunities for anyone who's able to do that kind of job in the world. And that's what people in the rest of the world are beginning to realize. And I'm just dropping these little hints here and there so that we would be able to appreciate how information that is available actually gives you more than one little piece. We have to sort of see what's available behind that piece of information. So if that is what the storm looks like, we also have to accept reality. And let me show you a picture of this reality. It's an unfortunate picture, but it's one that we still have to recognize. In the short to medium term, there does not seem to be any solution to the COVID crisis. It just looks like over the next 6 months to 8 months, we will go from one peak to another peak, and there'll be a partial lockdown followed by some relaxation, followed by other partial lockdowns, followed by some relaxation. And this is going to take a while to settle, which means for you and me that this is the new normal. And this is a phrase, the new normal, that has been mentioned in the media very, very frequently. This new normal requires that we accept that rules will keep changing, number one. Number two, it requires that we accept that people will eventually change their habits. So in my first webinar a few weeks ago, I had said there are 3 possibilities. This thing could be fixed in 3 to 4 months. It could take about a year. It could take about a year and a half. And now it looks like it might take a year and a half. Between 1 year to 1 year and a half. Because the fastest possibility of getting a vaccine is beginning of next year, spring of next year. And there may be some therapeutic drugs that might become available before that, but we're not counting on that anymore. Which means that we have to just accept this new reality and then position ourselves accordingly, and then recognize that every challenge comes with opportunity. It is our job now to look for that opportunity. That will require some thinking about our own situation, and some tools and techniques that I will share with you so that you might be able to think about your situation. As I mentioned, we have to accept the new normal, and that new normal consists of 2 things. Number one, expect that rules will keep changing. So small and infrequent gatherings, people can't get together anymore. That rule is going to be here for a little while. By a little while, I mean a year, year and a half. Some people are saying 2 years. So social distancing is here to stay for a while. The second one, travel restrictions. So people being able to travel between countries, it looks like for the foreseeable future we're going to have those even within countries, between states and cities and provinces. We might still have some travel restrictions that will stay. Hygiene requirements and the sort of requirements that we have, they're probably here to stay. There are some particular groups that are more vulnerable than others. Those groups, they're likely to continue to be vulnerable. That's here to stay. Global best practices. So, one country does something really well. So South Korea, for instance, these days is being praised for what they did and how they did it. For a little while, Singapore was praised as well. And the rest of the world is now trying to learn from other countries and copying their best practices. So expect rules to keep changing. That's one reality over the next year or so. The second reality is that people will become used to certain new habits. So remote work, for example, people will become used to it. And yes, I know for those of you who've been working remotely over the past few weeks, it turned from the feeling of a vacation to a real pain. And then eventually, as somebody who has worked remotely for many years in the past, I can tell you eventually it'll become a norm for you and you will get used to it. And I'll tell you who else is getting used to it. Employers are getting used to it, because I've had conversations with employers over the past week or so, and many of them are saying that even though their industry has now been allowed to have their employees come to the office, many of them are actually telling their employees to stay put, because they're beginning to see an improvement in productivity in some cases. In other cases, they're just really concerned about the spread of the virus and how it might affect their workforce. So remote work is probably here to stay. Also, the effect that remote work is going to have on our work-life balance, which is not always positive, is probably here to stay, which means as individuals, we will have to figure out how to make that work for those of us who are doing remote work. Thirdly, access to e-commerce and logistics, that is probably going to grow and is here to stay. And once people get used to it, once people get used to ordering remotely, that is probably going to continue. Online health, I had mentioned this in my previous webinar, the one I did 3 odd weeks ago. I had mentioned this at that time as well. And yes, it's already happening and it's likely to stay. Essentially, our business and lifestyle norms, which were more traditional in nature, are going to be impacted suddenly. And this sudden impact is what we're concerned about. That's why we call it the storm, because it's a very, very rapid change. If this thing had happened over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, we might not have noticed. But because it is happening over the course of 3, 4 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, it's too fast for many of us. And that's why we're calling it the storm. But remember, a storm is not necessarily always bad. I'll share a few examples with you. So what you will see on my screen is a list of innovations. So these are innovations that came about as a result of crises and recessions. So from chocolate chip cookies to Fortune magazine, to Monopoly the game, to Scotch tape, to iPods, to Heinz ketchup, to what you see here is a very, very old photocopy machine. This is the original photocopy machine. Diet Coke, fluorescent light bulbs. This is what we call the energy saver in this region. Basketball, Wrigley's chewing gum. And what you see here, this is a mechanical computer. This was first developed by IBM, which at that time had a different name. So all of these are contraptions or inventions that came out of recessions and crises, different types of crises. Many of them actually were developed immediately after the Spanish influenza hit the world and eventually led to the Great Depression. So storms are not all bad. There's actually frequently a lot of opportunity in storms. That is the opportunity that I want us to explore together. And it's not just entrepreneurs and inventors. I will share actual examples of people I have worked with in crisis situations, and I have observed them come out of crisis situations as employees of organizations very, very successful. So I'll mention 4 names. These are 4 people I have actually worked with. So the first one I'm going to mention is a person named Tonghua. He's a Chinese Singaporean that I worked with while I was with GE. And we were together during the original SARS crisis. So this is 2003, 2004. SARS was a disease that many of you know originally spread through Asia, and it affected certain Asian countries. And I've mentioned this in my previous webinars as well. And that epidemic, at that time not a pandemic, it was just an epidemic in certain countries, Singapore was included. That epidemic forced us to work from home, work remotely, and it was a real crisis. The economy suddenly went down. And I observed Tonghua becoming very versatile. He was good at certain things. He was working in the technology domain in our organization, and he quickly learned that the organization needed people who had expertise in process. So he learned how to analyze processes, and he did it very, very quickly. So he became versatile, and the organization saw this person who was obviously good at his job, but he was also very good at several other things that they needed, and that made him desirable for the organization. And the organization gave him additional responsibility, and he continued to have that responsibility and increased responsibility until he retired. So I saw him take advantage of a crisis to make himself desirable for the organization. Of course, he added value to the organization, so the organization rewarded him for it. That's one person. The second person is a guy I worked with. His name is Rama Mohan. And he, again, during the same crisis, the original SARS crisis, I noticed that he made himself indispensable. So he knew how to do certain things really, really well. And he continued to develop his expertise when things were going down. Everyone else was worried. Most people were just, biting their nails. And this guy was just, he would stick his head into his computer or his notes all day, speak to various people in the organization, and learn to do one job really, really, really well until nobody else knew as much about the system as he did, about the process as he did. He became indispensable for the organization. Even if the organization was in a tough spot and had to let some people go, let's say, they couldn't let him go because a lot depended on him. So that's the second strategy. And I saw that he did that in a crisis, and he was adding value to the organization and at the same time adding value to himself. This is the second one. The third person that I wanted to mention, his name is Harry. I'm actually concerned about saying the full name because all of these people are actually on LinkedIn and it's not very hard to find them. So I would just say Harry, and he was very good at making sure everyone knows how he's contributing. So obviously he would do a good job, but he made sure that people knew he was doing a good job. And this is remote. We're talking about the tools that were used back in 2004, 2005, not the sort of tools we have available today. We didn't have Microsoft Teams, for example. So he would use those tools, the telephone, for example, and he would use just online chat to make sure that the key people in the organization knew how he was adding value to the organization. So he was top of mind for people. And when the crisis ended, he kept getting promoted until he headed an entire country for the organization, and I really appreciate the verve with which he put himself to work, and I'm suggesting that approach for some of you who are working in organizations and might want to demonstrate to the rest of your organization that you can contribute and you're adding value. The fourth person that I'm going to mention was a friend of mine, and this is when I was with GE in the US. His name is Ben. And he was good at developing relationships, so working relationships, good professional relationships. And he would go around the organization and make sure that everybody knew how Ben could help them. So when we were in a state of crisis, the organization started laying some people off. So Ben actually got laid off for about a month. But within that month, they realized that they needed somebody to do a certain job, and he had networked so well that they immediately pulled him back. They said, well, actually, we need this guy. So in that way, he added value to the organization and he added value to himself as well. Remember, the rule of thumb, whether in a crisis or otherwise, is we win by helping our bosses and our organizations win. So remember that rule of thumb. That is going to be beneficial in this state of a crisis, as well as when the crisis is over. Now, when we think of crises, our brain goes into threat mode. So adrenaline comes in, and our view of the world becomes myopic. We begin to see a very small sort of a view of the world where we start focusing on one thing, the threat itself. So I've mentioned in my earlier webinars that we need to choose what to focus on. But today, what I'd like to highlight is why we tend to focus on certain things and what we could potentially do to focus on going into a state of flow. What is the state of flow? I have mentioned in the past two psychologists who are sort of the originators of two streams of psychology. So one is Sigmund Freud, a very famous name for reasons that I will mention at some other time. And the other one is Martin Seligman. You may not have heard of him, but he is the sort of the originator of positive psychology. So Sigmund Freud led the movement to analyze why people are sick, why people are mentally sick, why people are not happy, why people are depressed. And Martin Seligman said, okay, yeah, that's fine, we understand that now, but a lot of people are not depressed. Even in tough times, these people just get through and get things done. And why can't we study them and find out what makes them so positive? So these two initiated sort of in their, of course, in different eras, they initiated their own movements in psychology. And between these two, I've discovered that in times of crisis, Martin Seligman's positive psychology is a lot more helpful because he talks about our ability to become resilient and our ability to push through and get things done and get good quality work done. So that good quality work will manifest itself in the form of flow. So flow is a term, and the name of the psychologist who came up with this term is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I have this in the slides, and if you wanted to learn more about it, there's a book printed in 1992, I think, and the name of the book is Flow. Basically, it means when you have intense focus and concentration on a task, and you tend to do it really, really well. How does that come to be? When do you have that intense focus on a task? I mentioned 4 people who were my colleagues. I also mentioned other people who came up with new products, new businesses in times of crises. They had achieved this state of flow. How did they do it? And what was their secret? How can you and I go into a state of flow at a time like this? Number 1, we have to pick activities which give us a sense of purpose or meaning. The activity has to be enjoyable for us, so it has to be engaging, and there has to be some level of difficulty, so not easy things. So it has to be something difficult, which means there has to be a high barrier of entry. Not everyone's going to be able to do that activity. You pick that activity, you commit to that activity, and you push hard, and it takes a while until you become good at that activity. So that new activity could be a new aspect of your job, or it could be entrepreneurship. And I noticed that some people are asking questions about that. Suppose you don't have a job, or suppose you've been laid off. What are some potential things you could do? Well, obviously, one possibility is you could look for another job, and these are tough times. And the other possibility is you could develop yourself for a job in the future. And the third possibility is you could try to set up a business today or in the future. In that case also, you will have to develop yourself. So in all 3 cases, there's new learning to be done. And that new learning is only possible if you truly find meaning in that new activity you want to do, whether it's related to your job, a future job, or a business, or otherwise. Or it could be a non-profit thing that you want to do also. But that state of flow requires that, number 1, there has to be a sense of purpose and meaning. There has to be some sort of enjoyment. It has to be engaging for you. Number 3, it shouldn't be easy. It should be some difficulty. And number 4, you should have some level of control on it. Meaning, you may not know how to do it really well, but it should be possible for you to learn to do it well over a period of time. It may take 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. And I will talk to you about some opportunities to do that in a minute. Now, I do want to, in order to make this point clear, I do want to share with you examples of people who are in a state of flow. So some of these you might recognize, some of these you may not. At the top left is Dean Kamen, who is an inventor, and he's invented amazing things which have helped people in many, many different ways, from mechanical and robotic prosthetics to the Segway. And if you're not familiar with him, just Google his name, Dean Kamen. And when he works on solving someone's problem, that's an example of being in a state of flow. I also have pictures of some sports people, a very famous potter from Africa. So there's Muhammad Salah, there's Khabib Nurmagomedov. Some of you might be familiar with these faces, or you may not be familiar with them, but these are all people in a state of flow. And these are all people who have been through tough times. If you look at their life history, and I don't have time to go into it right now, but they've been through really, really difficult circumstances. And what they did was they used that difficult situation to find opportunities to grow, find opportunities to do really, really well. And that required that they learned new skills while things were tough, which is what I'm trying to highlight here. And that is something that we all need to consider. Now, let's talk about predicting the future. We know the present. We don't know the future. How could we potentially predict what the future could be like? There could be multiple possibilities. Predicting the future is not necessarily like an astrologer's dream. There's some science to it, because we can study history and compare it with the present, because the present is the future of the past. So we look at patterns that we get from between the past and the present, and we say those patterns are likely to apply in the future. So for example, a lot of you know about the great influenza epidemic, which is also called the Spanish flu, and we know what happened after that. So what happened after that is the future of that past, and we can see the patterns and we can learn from that. The second important aspect of this is, in order for us to project into the future, there needs to be some understanding that it is not possible. Dean Kamen, by the way, is K-A-M-E-N, Kamen. D-E-A-N-K-A-M-E-N, Kamen. So I was talking about predicting the future. So predicting the future is, it requires that we learn broadly. So we're talking about T-type people. So you have a lot of expertise in your own area. That's the vertical part of it. You have a lot of expertise in your own area. If you don't have it yet, then you develop it in one area, and then you have some breadth as well. You have knowledge of multiple areas. So that allows you to look beyond the present, because some studies have shown that people who are experts in one thing alone, they are actually not very good at projecting the present into the future. But people who are experts at one thing, but they also know a lot about other fields, they are better at projecting things into the future. So this study that I'm mentioning lasted for about 30, 34, 35 years, where they interviewed people and asked them what the future would look like in the 1970s, and then they compared their projections with what the future actually looked like in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and they discovered that people who had more broad knowledge were better at projecting things into the future. So that is one important point that I'm highlighting for you. Then there are other tools and techniques which may not be relevant to us here. What is relevant to us, though, is that we recognize we are going through a major shift. This COVID-19 thing is a major shift. It is not like something that has happened in the last 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. Frankly, a lot of people say it's like what happened in 1918 and 1919 and what happened in the 1920s, but I'm not entirely convinced. I feel that the world was not that well connected back then. So what we're going through is unique. This is a time when we can be sure that there's a rapid change in how we eat, how we work, how we shop, how we exercise, how we manage our health otherwise, and how we socialize, and how we spend our free time. There is a fundamental shift happening. That fundamental shift has to be recognized, and we have to appreciate the challenges and the opportunities that come with it. It's both. There are challenges, maybe challenges to the way we are today, maybe challenges to our current state of affairs, maybe there are challenges to how we are today. However, every challenge comes with an opportunity. And it is those of us who have resilience, as I mentioned in the past, it is those of us who want to learn from difficult circumstances and prepare ourselves for the ease that comes afterwards. It is those of us who will then take benefit out of the opportunity. Now, let's elaborate on the opportunity. What sort of an opportunity do we have? First of all, the conditions. Let's evaluate where we stand. So there's increasing national protectionism. I did mention this in my webinar 3 odd weeks ago in Beyond Coronavirus, but now it's becoming increasingly clear that countries are looking after their own benefits first. One example is that the United States is trying to find a way to have vaccine developed for their own citizens alone. And as sometimes, it seems like they're doing it at the expense of the citizens of the rest of the countries of the world. That's just one example, but you will see examples like that in our own country, in other countries. There will be many examples like that. National protectionism will increase, and that is an important condition that you and I need to appreciate. There's limited capital available all over the world. I know our government has announced that there will be some additional capital available for somebody who wants to set up a business, and that's really good if they do that. But in general, there's limited capital available. Venture capitalists, banks, they're not really interested in investing at this time. Then there are new laws, and those laws will keep changing. These laws will, they'll gradually manifest themselves, and I've talked about that earlier. Contactless everything. This is the new no-touch economy, and it is that new economy that we have to appreciate. In 3-4 weeks, the world has suddenly changed, and nobody wants to shake hands. Nobody wants to touch things. That presents threats, and that also presents opportunities. So recognize that that's an important condition. Supply chain disruptions, they've not happened in our country yet. And I think with the way the government is handling things, we should not expect them in the near future. However, there are opportunities where there may not be threats. of ensuring that the supply chain is insured. What the government is doing today, the private sector could do tomorrow. And therein lies an opportunity for your employer or possibly for yourself. And lastly, immunity is king. Those of us who are not immune yet may eventually become the have-nots. Because once, it sounds really bad as I say this, but eventually, those of us who will be able to go to work and not have to worry about this virus might be those who have immunity. We're not sure of that yet, but it might be those who have immunity, who've been through it once. So immunity might become your passport. Immunity is king. That presents threats and opportunity. New situation for us. So I'm trying to step into that by giving you an idea of how we project the present into the future. So I will start with one example. There are certain changes that have taken quite a while to sort of become accepted in the wider public. But in these three or 4 weeks, they've become accepted like that. One example of that is something that my company has been working on for about 13 years. We are among the pioneers of e-learning in this country. And it has been an uphill task for us to convince people. And all of a sudden, everyone is interested in e-learning. Whether it is high schools or colleges or universities or companies, everyone is interested in online learning. So gradual shifts are speeding up. Similarly, you also see an image of a robot, a delivery robot. So delivery robots became available about 3 to 4 years ago. I saw examples of them in our country as well, but they were not really accepted. But now all of a sudden we're in a situation where people are demanding that. The third example that you see is Chinese policemen who are wearing helmets that have infrared cameras built in, which is an invasion of your privacy. About a month ago, that's what people might have said. Hey, that's very private. I mean, why would I want somebody to know whether I have fever or not? But today, it's completely acceptable. So whatever was not acceptable in the past has suddenly become completely acceptable. Think no touch. Whatever is no touch is not just acceptable, it is in demand. And whatever is in demand is going to sell. And whatever is going to sell is going to help you retain or get a job, or it's going to help you do really well in a business. Now, I've just given you an appetizer. Now we're going to go to the main course. Let's start talking about the opportunities that come with the shift. What sort of opportunities do we have? I'm going to talk to you about 6 different shifts. And in each shift, we'll talk about some potential opportunities. So let's start here. I mentioned that working from home might become the norm. And if that happens, think about the changes that will bring. So one of the changes is less commute. You won't really be commuting to work that frequently, or at all in some cases. Which means there will be more time available. And if there's more time available, you would have to have a way of using up that time. What would you do during that time? Maybe you would volunteer. Maybe you would have hobbies. Now, that might mean that a few months down the road, the demand for volunteering opportunities and hobbies might increase. Similarly, we also noticed in the past couple of weeks that people's homes are not really designed for work. And you turn on the camera in a meeting and all of a sudden you can see all kinds of stuff in the background, and the professional who's trying to maintain a professional impression is also struggling to make sure their background is appropriate. There could be an opportunity there. Think about it. Go ahead and post it in the chat column if you see an opportunity there. What sort of an opportunity could there be if a lot of people begin to work from home? The third one, employer relationship changes. The sort of engagement you have with your employer might be different because, as I mentioned, a lot of employers are now saying, "Oh, you guys were home? You know what? That worked pretty well. I was actually able to manage my staff really well." So perhaps we should have continued remote work. Perhaps we should have flexible hours. And if that is the case, then how do I know that this person is actually doing their job? There could be an opportunity there. Again, opportunities, do not just think of opportunities for yourself in your own organization, but think broadly. There could be opportunities for entrepreneurship here. These opportunities, the way we're thinking about it, I want you to become used to it. Because as I mentioned earlier when we started our webinar, I don't know your specific situation. You will have to brainstorm your own opportunities. What I'm trying to do is take you through this process of brainstorming opportunities so that you can look at your own situation and apply the same process. So think about what could be, what sort of opportunities could come up. So for example, I'm noticing some people are saying furniture and designers and virtual backgrounds. Absolutely, yeah. So all of those are potential opportunities. And it's not just backgrounds, but the possibility of building cabins, which are cheap and easy to install. And, all of those are things we could potentially think of just in the working from home work stream. That's one, but there are others. So let's look at this one. We know that only limited gatherings are allowed. We know that it's no touch. We know that our choices will likely change. What sort of opportunities could that bring? Think about that. Go ahead, feel free to post it. No touch. We don't have, it's not possible to have gatherings, which means, you don't have, I noticed some people are saying that there could be a capsule room within a house, which is soundproof. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I think that's a real opportunity for a business that could pop up and might do really well. So consider that. So we were talking about limited gatherings. In limited gatherings, so maybe the shift will be from jobs to being an entrepreneur. No, that's not quite what I mean. I'm saying because of COVID-19, people's habits are shifting, and rules and regulations of the government are shifting, and that shift might be temporary, but it sounds like it's going to be permanent. That's what I emphasized at the beginning of the webinar. With that change, with that shift being permanent, there are opportunities and threats for us. So with that background, consider what could potentially be possible for us. So I said no touch, limited interaction, so small gathering, cost saving, that's true. It could be a virtual retail experience, absolutely, that's true. It's entirely possible that it could be a virtual way for you to turn on your screen and see somebody in a retail kiosk, and you are talking to this person about the features of a product. भाई आपके पास वो फला चीज़ है, and then the person says yes, मेरे पास है या नहीं है या ऐसी है, उसके ये features हैं नहीं है, and you say ठीक है मैंने इतनी खरीदनी है, okay, let's process the payment. I don't know, maybe that will work, maybe not, but that's a way of thinking about the opportunities that could come up. Think about also the possibility of shopping by appointment. So if you do need to go, you would set up an appointment first and then be there in time for your appointment. You are among the 3 people in the shop, in the big shop at that time, for example, in order to maintain social distance. And there could be some possible business arrangement around that. Restaurants might end up having cabins, and those cabins are such that it is not possible to transfer germs between people, so they maintain social distancing. I don't know, this idea might be just a fluke. It may work, it may not work at all. It is important though for us to keep thinking about potential opportunities, because that is practical creativity. This is where your rubber meets the road. If you thought you were a creative person, this is the time to demonstrate it, because it is that creativity which, when you perspire, when you put that creativity into some sort of a small experiment, you test it out, you see one idea might not work, you try a different idea, it might not work, third idea actually might work. And if it works, if you've not spent any significant amount of money, time and effort, you are then able to put that idea into practice. Again, for both situations, whether you're working in a job and you're doing this for your employer, or you are setting up an entrepreneurial sort of a setup and you're doing this for yourself. So the other thing that I mentioned in limited gatherings was, think about the sort of gatherings we have. So I see some other interesting ideas come up. You're saying try before you buy, sort of online clothes purchase. I think that's a great idea. It's worth a try. Shopping remotely. So some people are agreeing that yes, it may be a good idea to do that. So think about the other sort of gatherings we have. What about weddings? Weddings are a huge business, and that entire industry has been shaken to its core, and it will continue to be shaken. In that business, there has to be innovation now. And that innovation will be done by people who are resilient, who know these are tough times, but are willing to put in the effort, mental, possibly also physical, to come up with a better way of doing things, trying it out. Remember, there will be experimentation. You have to try things out, spending the least possible amount of money, if possible, nothing at all, but putting in your effort, trying different ideas to see what works. And if it works, then you push on. A lot of our choices will change as well. For example, a lot of performances that we are used to seeing in person might now have to be done remotely. Wedding ceremonies, I don't know, possibly done remotely, maybe. Yeah, I can't picture what that will look like, but it will take an innovator like the people that I have in the webinar right now. It will take an innovator like us to figure out how that new world could potentially look. What would continue to satisfy people's needs and add value to them, and could potentially be a new product or service that could be provided to them. Just accept that it's going to be the case going forward. And yes, weddings are likely to become simpler, and you are likely to spend a lesser amount of money. That is correct. This is the second stream. Let me go on to the third stream. And again, I'm not exhaustive. There could be tons of other ideas, and I notice many people are sharing many other ideas, but I'm very concerned about the total amount of time that I have. So I have to keep moving forward. The third stream is focus on health and personal care. We know that those of us who are able to avoid getting infected, or if we get infected, those of us who are able to recover are those with the best immune systems. And there's some really interesting studies that are coming out about what makes your immune system good. For example, a good night's sleep makes your immune system better. If you do it regularly, good night's deep sleep regularly done makes your immune system better. It sounds shocking, but walking among trees for extended periods of time on a regular basis makes your immune system better. I'm not making this up, by the way. If you're interested, I'd be happy to share these studies with you. So what makes your immune system better, in addition to all of this, is exercise. Watching your health, watching what you eat, and watching your health. Regular exercise, that adds to your immune system. And now a lot of us will become even more concerned about our immune systems. Therein lies an opportunity for the health and personal care industry. But how will that be provided remotely? That's something for innovators to think about. Is that going to be online health? Is that going to be online exercise? So my son, for example, used to take a karate class, and now that karate class is being done online, and we're still figuring out whether it's working. I think it might actually work because my son is already enjoying it. That's an idea for you, because people's habits are changing. It's time to start thinking about how other aspects which are not being covered online could potentially be covered online. The other aspect of personal health is mental health. A lot of people will now find that issues that they were not able to, issues that did not come to the surface earlier because they had the ability to interact with other people, will suddenly start coming to the surface. They will feel lonely, and that loneliness might get to them. And if that happens, then they will need possibly remote therapy, remote counseling. I know there are a bunch of people involved with us today who have expertise in that area. This is something to consider. This is the time to really think about how you might be able to add value. It's not just therapy though. It could also potentially be remote companionship. People will want to still interact with their friends online, and that interaction might take the form of a friend that you had from before COVID and you're interacting with them online, or it might be a friend that you make. You develop friendship with somebody during this crisis. People that I went to high school with, we had an online reunion 3 nights ago. It was the most surreal experience. I met people I had not met in 32 years, and it was I left in 6th grade, and all of a sudden I was interacting with these people, and it didn't take long, and we were having fun together. I would not, even though my background is technology, I could not believe the ease with which I was able to interact with them, knowing that that's the only choice available. And therein lies an opportunity. Other opportunities that have been mentioned here are possibly pets, possibly a connection with online communities. So we know that even even without video, online forums have done really well. So if you want to see an example of that, my webinar last week was about conspiracy theories. So around each conspiracy theory, there are online communities that sort of spread conspiracy theories. There are some people who are conspiracy theorists, and they sort of lead these online communities. And these online communities do not involve video, it's just text, and they post stuff on forums. And those communities work really well, and people have this sense of companionship. I feel that that's an area that is now going to expand, where there will be more and more online communities that will provide that kind of support. So watch out for that stream. There could potentially be opportunities there. Okay, so another stream is travel restrictions. So I know there are a bunch of people from the travel industry. We just have to, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but we have to accept the fact that travel is heavily impacted. But you obviously need some opportunities. What does that mean? It could mean potentially local tourism only. There are no international trips. Maybe there are no long distance trips. For example, from my city, I wouldn't be able to go to the south of the country. I wouldn't be able to go to the east of the country. But I may be able to do some trips within, let's say, a 20 mile, 30 mile, 40 mile, 50 mile radius, or maybe a little bit longer radius, or maybe something within the country. Those sorts of local tourism opportunities might still be available. So think camping. I don't know if that's going to work, but I'm just throwing ideas. Think about that. There could potentially be opportunities, even though there seems to be a real lull in the travel industry. Think about that, and think about how you could make yourself useful for that. How you could sort of maneuver to that, because people still would have money to spend, and they would be looking for opportunities to relax and sort of go out and about and do things. Similarly, another way of doing this could be home recreation. How do you do things at home? Maybe this would mean a revival of board games that families do together. Maybe it's esports. Maybe it's something else that I can't think of, that some of the other smart people that we have here today, maybe you guys can think of. There could be multiple other ways that travel restrictions could actually benefit a new industry that could pop up out of this. So think about that. My fifth stream that I wanted to mention is unreliable supply chains, where you don't know if we're going to get mangoes from Sindh, which are among my favorite. My absolute favorite mangoes are mangoes from Sindh. We don't know what the future will be like. Maybe the mangoes from Sindh will only be consumed within Sindh. But if that is the case, then what sort of opportunities pop up for strengthening the supply chain? There are a bunch of people here today I know who are working with organizations that are in the logistics industry. And logistics could have a real role to play in areas where they did not play a role earlier. So this was an unregulated sector in the past, and a lot of logistics companies did not get involved in produce. But this might be the opportunity to get involved in that area, because there's a need, and every itch needs to be scratched. That might be your itch to scratch. It's something that an individual could do, kitchen gardening. And I'm not just talking about you building your own kitchen garden. I'm talking about you possibly leading a kitchen gardening community and becoming the kitchen gardening diva. And that could, potentially be your brand for the future. Again, I'm throwing ideas at you that might not be the best fit for you, but I hope that will inspire you to think of other ideas which might be a better fit for whatever area you're working in. We also have to recognize the reality that there will be mass unemployment. A large number of people will become unemployed, and that will happen in several industries, which could potentially mean an increase in gigs and freelancing. And that comes with some threats and opportunities. I actually feel that as a country, there's more opportunity in that for us. You may not agree with me, but I have some reasons for thinking that. But that also means that there will be increased stress at home, which means that family relationships will become strained. And perhaps that's an opportunity for online marriage counseling. And I'm saying this not just because that's an opportunity for somebody to set up a business. I actually feel that there's a real value that could be added, and people will be looking for that kind of value to be added. So I've talked to you about some opportunities which are more entrepreneurial in nature. I also wanted to talk to you briefly about the relevance of your skills and about the impact on your industry. So what I've done is, and I'm gonna share this slide with you, that you will see that the text is very small, but in this text, I'll very quickly go through it. I'll explain to you how the slide works. But what I want you to remember is I will send this slide to you if you want. In fact, everybody who has registered, we will send the slide to them. And you will be able to read it closely yourself as well. For now, just pay attention. Okay? So on the vertical axis here, I have low, medium, and high. This is the relevance of your skills in the low touch economy. So it could be low relevance, these 4 red boxes. It could be medium relevance, which is the 4 yellow boxes, and high relevance, which is the 4 green boxes. But on the horizontal axis, we have the impact on your industry. So positive impact, that's the first column. Mildly negative impact, the second column. Severe impact is the third column. Catastrophic impact, that's the fourth column. So I have also provided examples of industry. So online retail is going to have a positive impact. Consumer goods is going to have a mildly negative impact. A bunch of you are here from the education industry. I don't think education industry is going to have much of an impact. If any, it will be a positive impact. Severe impact for oil and gas, and catastrophic impact for travel, for tourism. So that is what we think the impact is going to be. And then in the text here is what might be a suitable recommendation for you. Don't take this as writing in stone. This is just what I think things could look like. But here's an example. If, let's say, severe impact and your skills are low, this is the third column in the red. This is learn new skills from scratch if necessary. That might be the recommendation for you. Or if it is positive impact and green, that's the first column, and high, which is green. So that will be make sure you add value and that your contribution is visible. So that means you're not only do you have a job or your business is flourishing, but whatever's happening, make sure people know what you're doing and they know the effort that you're making so that you can be recognized for it. So this is what the slide looks like, and I will let you read it on your own afterwards because there's a lot more detail to this, and I want you to do some introspection. Lastly, I want to talk to you about what we ought to do now. This is going to be a takeaway. So number one, you will get the slide that I just showed, and that slide will help you sort of introspect where do I stand and what could be a potential recommendation for you from Kamran. The second thing that I want to do to provide to you as a takeaway is mention 4 principles. This is a summary of the webinars that we've had in the past. Number 1, resilience. So 2 weeks ago we talked about this. Toughen up. This is the time to be mentally ready to rough it out. It's not going to be easy. I've said this every single week over the past 4 weeks. It's not going to be easy. But we have to survive. And after the storm, there will be a calm. Believe that, because that's what happens every time. And knowing that, prepare for that calm. During this time, you might just want to push and survive, and afterwards, be ready to reap the benefits. And I've shared examples with you of people who used these times of crises well and eventually benefited from their effort made during the time of the crisis immensely. So this is number 1, toughen up. Number 2, make yourself useful all the time. Remember, even if you're not being paid for it, find something useful to do. Because if you are not adding value, let's say you're just sitting back and watching Netflix, you are wasting valuable time. This is the time to build yourself. This is the time to do it. So make yourself useful. Find useful things to do. Even if you're not getting paid for it, even if you're doing it for free for other people, if you are adding value, then value will find you and you will develop skills that will become extremely valuable when the storm ends. This is the second one, make yourself useful. Number 3, consider gig work. Gig work meaning short-term work. And think of how you can add value, and the slide that I'm going to send you might give you some idea of, some introspection on where you might fit. And then think about what you can do that other people cannot do. How are you special? What makes you special? What aspect of that is marketable? What aspect of that might people be interested in using? And if you don't have that today, what could you learn so that you could potentially become marketable? Number 4, inventory your skills. Make a list of the skills that you have and evaluate. What do you know? And what should you know? Take some free courses. I've mentioned this in the past, and some people said, can you share a link? So go to online-learning.harvard.edu, if I'm not wrong. And maybe one of my colleagues can look this up and share the actual URL. So Harvard has online courses on hundreds of subjects. These are not quick courses, okay? This is not an hour, 2 hours long. These are courses that will give you a certificate, and they're usually very expensive. 60 of them are free right now. They usually cost $2,800 each, including data science, by the way, in case some of you are interested. But what is required from you is that you put in the effort to learn. It's not going to be easy, but it is possible. This is the opportunity to build yourself. So inventory your skills and learn. So I'll very quickly share this slide as well, the one that I was just talking about. Toughen up, make yourself useful, consider gig work, and inventory your skills. And with that, I hope that we've had the opportunity to sort of evaluate what are some opportunities that could lie in some of the streams that I've mentioned, and then learn how we might be able to use the same process for our own areas, or whatever areas we work in. And you are unique, your skills are unique, your industry is unique. You and your industry have a relationship that is unique. It is in that I want you to look for these opportunities for what I hope is going to be a very bright future. With that, I will end my talk and I will leave a few minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please start putting them in. In the meanwhile, I will take a look at some of the questions you've already posted, and I will leave this slide up just so you can, you have it available. So while the questions are coming up, I'll address a couple of comments that I noticed. So some people are saying that once we have addressed some of the restrictions somehow, let's say that there's some sort of a cure available. And frankly, I want the cure to be available as soon as possible. And I've talked about this in my earlier webinars. There are some drugs that are being evaluated at this time, and if those therapeutic drugs become available, then that solution might help out. But we can't depend on that because President Trump mentioned hydroxychloroquine, and it became, everybody started talking about it. And unfortunately, scientists have not been able to confirm its efficacy in double-blind trials, in random control trials. They've not been able to do that so far. And there are some other drugs being tested. We can't really depend on that. And that's why I think we need to keep chugging along. Are there no digital marketing courses at Harvard for offering? I don't think so. Digital marketing is not the kind of thing you would expect at Harvard, but you will be able to find some of those courses on udemy.com. You may be able to find some of those courses on coursera.com, which, by the way, if you take it without a certificate, it's free. If you take it with a certificate, I think it's $50 or something like that. So that's something for you to check. Any bonus points considering the Pakistan market? Actually, everything that I mentioned is relevant to our market as well as other markets across the world. So nothing special, nothing specific to us, because this is a global problem and it's affecting everyone almost equally. In that, it's actually quite democratic, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I noticed other people are also mentioning Coursera. So since there are no other questions coming up, this talk will be available afterwards. And what I'll do is I'll have my colleagues send you a link to the feedback form. If you want us to do another webinar on a topic that you think is really important, and if we're able to do it, please make sure you fill it in the feedback form. We'll give you a question in the feedback form for that. So if you fill it out, we will then figure out if we can do a webinar on that, and then we'll announce it, and we'll email all of you guys. Please give a few tips regarding marriage counseling. That's not my area of expertise, but there are people in this chat at this time who have this kind of expertise. And if they don't have that expertise, by the way, it is possible to take online courses to develop this skill as well. It'll take some time to develop, but that's an area you could explore. You're in the consulting business. How has it impacted your business in monetary terms? Actually, we used to be in the consulting business a long time ago, Usman. It is possible that we've not met during the past many years. So we are no longer in the consulting business per se. Sometimes we do consulting for some of our customers, but we actually sell technology. And we sell technology for e-learning, we sell technology for hiring. That's actually the primary sort of work that we do. As far as consulting is concerned, I think business will be impacted in quite a major way. That's my guess, and I've not had the opportunity to speak to people who are in the consulting business recently. There should be a platform where potential entrepreneurs could discuss their ideas to get a feedback. Please let us know if there's any platform available already. Okay, so there are a bunch of groups on Facebook. And although I'm not a part of those groups, but if you look up just open and then mention the name of your city. So open, let's say Islamabad, or open Karachi, open Peshawar, open Quetta, open Lahore. So open is a platform like that. And that's a good place to start. And eventually you'll find other platforms as well, or just Facebook groups that do that. Yes, the recording of this session will be available afterwards, the same link. So once this is over, after a few minutes, I think YouTube takes a few minutes to process it, that recording will be available. And the next time you come to this link, it will start from the very beginning. Downstream gas employees, I would need to know more about that. But I think the slide that you will receive might help you think about where you fall. I may not know enough about your business, but you know a lot more about your business. So think about where you might fall and how this might potentially impact you. I'm going to take a wild guess that there will be mildly negative impact, but I could be completely wrong. You know more about this. I mentioned my 3 colleagues who prepared themselves during SARS. There are sometimes barriers to growth. How would we reach out so that we have potential or are resilient and can be useful? So Marina, these are a bunch of different questions. I'll just be able to answer one of them, which is how do you grow when you see barriers around you? So there are 2 ways, 2 aspects to growth. One is a growth in your own ability. The second one is other people recognizing that you're growing. So growth in your own ability, of course, comes from you being willing to learn, being able to just do the boring task of pushing yourself to learn in difficult circumstances and just getting it done. So that is how you grow in person. That could be through a course. It could be through maybe learning from another colleague, and in this case, remotely. The second aspect is making sure that people know you are learning, you have new skills, you're doing new things. That might mean you volunteer for parts of your job that in the past you did not do. So volunteering might help. Pakistan startups, or somebody suggesting a group. Do you think companies in Pakistan will become that flexible to allow work from home? Actually, at this time, Noor, I don't know. But if this goes on for a little while, then it might just become the norm. And unfortunately, it looks like it will go on for a while, which is why working from home, at least for a segment of the population, seems to be the foreseeable reality. And I know Allah knows the future, but that's what it looks like. Okay, so oil and gas sector is not going to be in deep recession as the general impression is. Oh yeah, that's possible. And if that does not apply, or if that is not the reality for your specific segment of that sector, then that's great. Okay, so correct. So the operation costs for organization will go down because of work from home. I'm not, by the way, I'm not promoting work from home. All I'm saying is just an acceptance of the reality. In-house lawyers, any additional work they can do in the near future. So there's an interesting talk that I came across recently. I don't remember the title and I did not even listen to all of it, but I do recommend that you look up the legal profession post-COVID or something like that. How will the legal profession change post-COVID? So look into that and you might find that talk and that might help you. There's frequent high variation expected in the next year, so one can convert business or opportunity idea into action. Yeah, actually, the important thing to remember is any business has to do two things. Number one, when you're setting up a business, you have to experiment, and that experimentation has to be as cheap as possible. So cheap experiments run on a regular basis. That is number one. Number two, once you've set up a business and let's say you've started selling and people are buying, you can't sit on your laurels and say that, okay, now I have a business, because things will change rapidly. I mentioned that as one of the conditions. Rules and regulations will change. You know, the reality of this COVID epidemic will change. So you will then have to continue to update your business accordingly. That's the unfortunate reality. But the benefit of that is by the time this thing ends and the calm after the storm shows up, your business will be flexible, it'll be malleable, it'll be lean, and hopefully it'll be profitable. More profitable than many other businesses who have not changed that rapidly. How do you suggest that we maintain work-life balance during work from home? So I'll tell you what I do, and perhaps that will help because I have experience in doing this for many years. So what I do is I have a set time at which I start, and I have a set time at which I end, and I have a location. In a particular room which is accessible to other people in the house, but in that room I have a location and that is my work location. When I'm sitting at that work location, other people know not to bother me, and I'm at that work location within a certain period of time. So let's say I start at 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning and I end at, let's say, 5 or 6. So that work hours and work location, I maintain that. As long as I'm doing that, I make sure that my colleagues know during that time I'm available, and other than that, I'm not. So that is what I can suggest, because you need a mental switch. Now I'm leaving this location. I am no longer involved in work anymore. So I've mentally made a switch. Okay, you recommend short online courses nowadays? Yeah, sure. It depends. It depends on, again, once you read the slide, you will discover whether in your case it's applicable. In general, I always recommend learning, but the specific sort of learning will depend on your own situation and whether you will get value out of that learning. If you belong from business consulting and marketing, yeah, the same thing applies. What I said applies. Will we also get a certificate from these free courses from Harvard? Yes, that is what makes them so special. Yes, if you complete the course, and yes, you'll have to take a test. But if you complete the course, you will get a certificate. It's called the Harvard X certificate, which means it's not a university certificate, but it's still recognized. It's recognized in the sense that it's a course offered by Harvard and you completed it. So with that, I've covered the questions that we had. We're over our time. I wish you guys all the very best, and I hope that that when we send you the link for the feedback form, that you will fill it out. If you have, remember that question that I mentioned, if you have something that you want us to do a webinar on, let us know. Other than that, Assalamu alaikum, and I wish you guys all the best.